The morning sun cast gentle shadows through the windows of Bennett's Corner Market. Golden light filtered across shelves stocked with everyday necessities. The small neighborhood store hummed with quiet activity as early customers picked up coffee and newspapers before heading to work. Grace Bennett arranged fresh flowers in a bucket near the entrance. At 34, she had the calm presence of someone who had found peace in life's simple routines. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her blue cotton shirt was crisp but comfortable. There was something inherently trustworthy about her demeanor that made customers feel welcome. Grace had owned the corner market for 6 years. She knew most of her customers by name. She remembered their preferences and asked about their families. The store wasn't particularly profitable, but it served the community well. That mattered more to Grace than impressive profit margins. The morning rush was winding down when the front door chimed. Grace looked up from her flower arrangement to see a man she didn't recognize. He was thin to the point of gauntness. His clothes were clean but worn. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept properly in days. Most notably, he carried a tiny baby wrapped in a faded yellow blanket. The man approached the counter hesitantly. His hands shook slightly as he held the infant. The baby was so small it couldn't be more than a few weeks old. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I need help." Grace set down the flowers and gave him her full attention. "What can I do for you?" "My baby," he said, looking down at the bundle in his arms. "She's hungry. I've been trying to find formula, but I don't have enough money right now. I was wondering if maybe you could spare just a small container of milk. Anything would help." Grace moved closer and gently pulled back the blanket to see the baby's face. The infant was beautiful, but clearly distressed. Her tiny lips were slightly blue from crying. Her eyes were unfocused in the way that suggested weakness from hunger. "What's her name?" Grace asked softly. "Emma," the man replied. "She's 3 weeks old. I'm Daniel, by the way. Daniel Rodriguez." Grace felt her heart clench as she looked at little Emma. The baby made weak crying sounds that spoke of desperate need. This wasn't ordinary fussiness. This was a child in genuine distress. "Daniel," Grace said gently, "when did Emma last eat?" "Yesterday morning," Daniel admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I've been trying to find work, trying to figure things out, but she can't wait anymore." Grace didn't hesitate. She had given birth to her own son just 8 months earlier. She understood exactly what this baby needed, and she knew she could provide it. "Come with me," she said, leading Daniel toward the back of the store. "Let's take care of Emma right now." In the small office behind the store, Grace created a quiet, private space. She gently took Emma from Daniel's arms. The baby was lighter than she should be, which confirmed Grace's fears about how long she had been without proper nutrition. "It's okay, little one," Grace whispered to Emma. "Everything is going to be okay now." Without any hesitation or self-consciousness, Grace began to nurse the hungry infant. Emma latched on immediately with the desperate intensity of a child who had been waiting too long for this basic need to be met. Daniel stood nearby, tears streaming down his face as he watched his daughter finally getting the nourishment she needed. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. "You don't need to thank me," Grace replied, gently stroking Emma's tiny head. "She just needed what any baby needs." As Emma nursed, her color began to improve. Her breathing became steadier. The weak crying stopped completely as she focused entirely on feeding. Within minutes, she had fallen into the peaceful sleep of a satisfied infant. When Emma was clearly comfortable and well-fed, Grace carefully transferred her back to Daniel's arms. Then she did something that would change both their lives forever. Grace walked to her desk and pulled out her personal checkbook. She wrote her signature on a blank check, leaving the amount line empty. She handed it to Daniel. "Take care of your daughter," she said simply. "Just promise me you'll use this to build something stable for both of you." Daniel stared at the blank check in disbelief. "I can't accept this. You don't even know me." "I know enough," Grace replied. "I know you're a father who walked into a stranger's store asking for help when your baby was hungry. I know you're willing to do whatever it takes to take care of her. That's all I need to know. Where are you watching this video right now? At home, at work, or maybe out running errands? Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing from each and every one of you. Grace Bennett had never considered herself particularly special or extraordinary. She lived what most people would call an ordinary life. She was married to Tom, a kind man who worked as an electrician. They had one son, 8-month-old Michael, who brought them daily joy with his toothless grins and baby babble. Their life wasn't glamorous or particularly wealthy, but it was stable and filled with love. They owned their small house outright, having inherited it from Grace's grandmother. Tom's electrical business provided steady income. Grace's corner market contributed enough to cover their basic expenses and put a little aside for Michael's future. Grace had grown up in the same neighborhood where she now lived. Her parents, Robert and Marie, had taught her and her 2 siblings that helping others wasn't something you did for recognition or reward. It was simply what decent people did when they had the ability to help. If you can do something to ease someone's suffering, her mother had always said, then you have a responsibility to do it. Not because you'll get something back, but because it's the right thing to do. This philosophy had shaped Grace's entire approach to life. She volunteered at the local food bank every month. She regularly baked extra meals for elderly neighbors. When customers at her store couldn't afford necessities, she quietly marked items down or simply forgot to charge for them. Grace's decision to nurse Daniel's baby hadn't required any internal debate. She was still breastfeeding Michael. She had what Emma needed. The logistics were simple. The ethics were even simpler. A hungry baby is a hungry baby, Grace would later tell her husband when she recounted the morning's events. It doesn't matter whose baby it is or how they got to be hungry. If I can feed a baby, then that's what I'm going to do. Tom Bennett had married Grace partly because he admired her practical compassion. She didn't agonize over moral decisions that seemed obvious to her. She didn't create complicated conditions for helping others. She simply did what needed to be done. What did you find out about him? Tom asked that evening as they sat on their front porch watching Michael play with building blocks. His name is Daniel Rodriguez. He's 26 years old. He lost his job 3 months ago when the restaurant where he worked closed down. Emma's mother left shortly after the baby was born. He's been staying in a shelter and trying to find work, but it's hard to interview for jobs when you have a newborn and no childcare. Tom nodded thoughtfully. So the blank check? He looked like someone who would use it responsibly, Grace said simply. Sometimes you have to trust people to do the right thing. Grace's approach to helping others had always been direct and practical. She didn't believe in creating complicated systems or bureaucratic processes. When she saw a need she could meet, she met it. When she encountered a problem she could solve, she solved it. This approach sometimes frustrated friends and family who thought Grace was too trusting. They worried that people would take advantage of her generosity. They suggested she should research recipients more thoroughly or attach more conditions to her help. But Grace had learned something important from years of community involvement. Most people, when given genuine help without judgment or conditions, rose to meet the trust that had been placed in them. The few who didn't weren't worth changing her entire approach to helping others. The corner market had become something of a community hub under Grace's ownership. She posted job announcements on a bulletin board near the register. She let local artists display their work on the walls. She stocked products from neighborhood businesses even when she could get cheaper alternatives from wholesalers. Customers often lingered longer than necessary, chatting with Grace about their lives and concerns. Parents brought their children in to buy candy and ended up discussing school problems or family challenges. Elderly customers came in for groceries and stayed to share stories about their grandchildren. Grace understood that her role in the community extended far beyond selling necessities. She was often the person people turned to when they needed advice, support, or simply someone to listen. She took this responsibility seriously but never made a big show of it. Her decision to give Daniel a blank check represented the same practical approach she brought to all her community involvement. She assessed the situation quickly, determined what was needed, and provided it without unnecessary complications. But what if he uses it for something other than the baby? Her sister had asked when Grace told her about the incident. Then he uses it for something other than the baby, Grace had replied. But I don't think he will. And even if he does, that doesn't mean I was wrong to offer help when it was needed. This confidence in her own judgment came from years of experience helping others. Grace had developed an intuitive sense about people's character and motivations. She was rarely wrong in her assessments, partly because she approached people with genuine trust rather than suspicion. The blank check wasn't a grand gesture in Grace's mind. It was simply the most efficient way to address Daniel's immediate and long-term needs. She could have given him a specific amount, but she trusted him to determine what was appropriate better than she could from the outside. Grace went to sleep that night, feeling satisfied that she had done something useful. She didn't expect recognition or gratitude. She certainly didn't expect the encounter to change her life in any significant way. She was wrong about that last part. Daniel Rodriguez stared at the blank check for 3 full days before deciding how to use it. He carried it in his wallet like a talisman, pulling it out occasionally to make sure it was real. The trust Grace had placed in him felt both empowering and terrifying. During those 3 days, Daniel stayed at the shelter and continued his job search with renewed energy. Emma was healthy and feeding well, thanks to the formula he had been able to purchase immediately after leaving Grace's store. But Daniel knew that short-term relief wasn't enough. He needed to build something sustainable for his daughter's future. On the 4th day, Daniel filled in the amount line, $1,500. It was enough to rent a small apartment and buy basic necessities, but not so much that he felt he was taking advantage of Grace's generosity. He cashed the check and immediately began putting his plan into action. Within a week, Daniel had found a studio apartment in a safe neighborhood. It wasn't much, just 1 room with a tiny kitchen and bathroom, but it was clean and quiet. More importantly, it was theirs. Daniel also invested in a used food truck. The vehicle needed work, but the engine was sound and the kitchen equipment was functional. Daniel had worked in restaurant kitchens for 8 years before Emma was born. He understood food preparation, customer service, and basic business operations. Papa's Kitchen opened for business 3 weeks after Daniel's encounter with Grace. The truck specialized in simple, hearty meals that working people could afford. Daniel parked outside construction sites during lunch hours and near office buildings during dinner time. The business grew slowly but steadily. Daniel's food was good, his prices were fair, and his story resonated with customers who appreciated his determination to build a life for his daughter. Word about Daniel's transformation began to spread through the neighborhood. People were intrigued by the story of the young father who had received help from a local store owner and used it to create a successful business. But it was Grace's role in the story that really captured people's attention. The idea that she had nursed a stranger's baby and given him a blank check challenged many people's assumptions about appropriate helping behavior. Some community members were skeptical. They questioned whether Grace's actions had been wise or safe. They worried about setting precedents that might encourage people to take advantage of local businesses. But others were inspired. They began looking for ways to provide more direct, personal assistance to people in need. The local food bank saw an increase in volunteers. The homeless shelter received more donations. Neighborhood businesses started posting job opportunities more prominently. Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatrician who lived in the area, heard about Grace's decision to nurse Daniel's baby through her network of parent clients. She was both impressed and concerned. From a medical standpoint, what Grace did was incredibly generous, but also risky, Dr. Chen explained to her colleague. Breastfeeding someone else's baby requires trust and careful consideration of health factors. But Dr. Chen also understood the desperation that would drive a parent to accept help from a stranger. She began working with local social services to develop better support systems for new parents in crisis situations. The story reached Marcus Williams, a local business owner who had struggled with unemployment earlier in his career. He remembered the shame and frustration of not being able to provide for his family during difficult times. Marcus decided to create a microloan program for people wanting to start small businesses. He partnered with a community college to provide basic business training. The program would offer loans with flexible repayment terms and ongoing mentorship. Daniel's story reminded me that sometimes people just need someone to believe in them, Marcus explained at the program's launch event. Grace saw potential where others might have seen only problems. Local news outlets picked up the story after a customer at Grace's store mentioned it to a reporter. The coverage was generally positive, focusing on the community connections that had emerged from Grace's initial act of kindness. But Grace herself remained uncomfortable with the attention. She continued running her store the same way she always had. She helped customers when they needed help. She provided support when people asked for it. She didn't see any of this as newsworthy or unusual. "People are making too big a deal out of this," Grace told her husband. "I did what anyone would do in that situation." Not everyone would do what you did, Tom replied. That's why people are talking about it. Daniel made sure to stop by Grace's store every few weeks to update her on his progress. He always brought Emma, who was growing stronger and more alert. Grace enjoyed these visits but never made Daniel feel obligated to report back to her. I just want to know that you're both doing well, she would tell him. You don't owe me updates or explanations. But Daniel felt a responsibility to demonstrate that Grace's trust had been well placed. He kept careful records of his business income and expenses. He saved money consistently. He made sure Emma received regular medical checkups and proper nutrition. The food truck business provided enough income for Daniel to move to a larger apartment when Emma turned 6 months old. He hired a part-time employee so he could spend more time with his daughter during her waking hours. Most importantly, Daniel began planning for Emma's future education and his own professional development. Grace's blank check had given him more than money. It had given him the confidence to dream beyond mere survival. 8 months after their first meeting, Daniel Rodriguez appeared at Grace's store with a formal business proposal. Emma, now almost a year old, sat contentedly in her stroller, babbling happily and reaching for the colorful displays. Grace, I want to offer you something, Daniel said, pulling out a folder of documents. Papa's kitchen is doing really well. Well enough that I want to expand. I'd like you to be my business partner. Grace looked through the paperwork Daniel had prepared. Financial statements showed steady growth and healthy profit margins. Customer reviews were overwhelmingly positive. Daniel had clearly put tremendous effort into building a legitimate business. This is impressive work, Daniel, Grace said, genuinely proud of what he had accomplished. You should feel very proud of what you built. I couldn't have built any of it without your help, Daniel replied. That's why I want you to share in the success. I'm proposing a 50-50 partnership. You would own half of the business and receive half of all profits going forward. Grace was touched by Daniel's offer, but it made her deeply uncomfortable. Daniel, this is incredibly generous, but I can't accept this. Why not? Daniel asked, clearly confused. You deserve to benefit from what your help made possible. Because that's not why I helped you, Grace explained gently. I didn't give you that check because I was making an investment. I gave it to you because your baby was hungry and you needed help. Daniel sat down in the chair Grace kept near the counter for customers who wanted to chat. But you took a risk on me. You trusted me with your money. Don't you think you should be rewarded for that? I have been rewarded, Grace said. Every time you stop by with Emma and I can see that she's healthy and happy, that's my reward. Every time you tell me about a new customer or a successful day, that's my reward. But this could change your life, Daniel pressed. The business is growing fast. Within a few years, your half could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. You could retire early, travel, give Michael opportunities you can't afford now. Grace understood Daniel's reasoning, but it felt wrong to her on a fundamental level. Daniel, if I become your business partner, then what I did for you wasn't really kindness anymore. It becomes a business transaction. It changes the whole meaning of what happened between us. Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing Grace's perspective. I never thought about it that way. Besides, Grace continued, I don't want to be a business owner. I like running my little store. I like serving this community. I like the life I have. More money wouldn't make it better. Then let me pay you back at least the $1,500 plus interest. You already paid me back, Grace said firmly. You paid me back by taking care of Emma. You paid me back by building something positive from the help you received. You paid me back by proving that my trust was well placed. Daniel left the store that day feeling both disappointed and impressed. He had expected Grace to jump at the opportunity for financial gain. Her refusal forced him to think more deeply about the nature of her original gift. That evening, Daniel called his sister Maria, who lived across the country. He had been telling her about Grace's impact on his life throughout the past months. She wouldn't take anything, Daniel told Maria. Not partnership, not repayment, nothing. I don't understand it. Maybe that's exactly why her help meant so much to you, Maria suggested. If she had expected something back, it wouldn't have been the same kind of gift. Daniel realized his sister was right. Grace's help had been powerful precisely because it had come with no strings attached. She had trusted him completely without expecting anything in return. That trust had motivated him to work harder and dream bigger than he might have otherwise. The next week, Daniel returned to Grace's store with a different proposal. I've been thinking about what you said, he told her, about how partnership would change the meaning of what you did for me. I understand that now. Good, Grace said. I was worried I had hurt your feelings. You didn't hurt my feelings. You taught me something important about generosity. Daniel paused, then continued. But I still want to find a way to honor what you gave me, not by paying you back, but by passing it forward. Grace was interested. What do you have in mind? I want to create a fund that helps other single parents start small businesses. Nothing complicated or bureaucratic, just direct help, the way you helped me. Grace smiled. That sounds perfect. I was hoping you might help me figure out how to do it right, not as a business partner, but as someone who understands how to help people without making them feel dependent or ashamed. I'd be happy to help with that, Grace said, but only if you promise that the fund won't be named after me or publicize my involvement. Deal, Daniel agreed. This isn't about recognizing you. It's about continuing what you started. Grace felt satisfied with this solution. Daniel had found a way to honor her help without turning it into something transactional. More importantly, he had learned the deeper lesson about generosity. Its power comes from being freely given, not from what it might generate in return. 1 year later, Daniel Rodriguez stood before a crowd of 200 people at the community center, preparing to announce the launch of the Fresh Start Fund. Emma, now a confident toddler, sat in the front row with Grace and her family, clapping her hands and babbling excitedly. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel began, his voice steady but emotional. A year and a half ago, I walked into a corner market with my hungry baby, desperate for help. I expected maybe a small container of milk. Instead, I met someone who changed both our lives forever. The audience listened intently as Daniel told his story. He spoke about the morning when Grace had nursed Emma and given him a blank check. He described the weeks of uncertainty as he decided how to use that trust. He detailed the growth of Papa's Kitchen and the stability it had brought to his family. But Daniel's focus wasn't on his personal success. He was launching something bigger. The Fresh Start Fund will provide direct assistance to single parents who want to start small businesses, Daniel announced. No complicated applications, no bureaucratic processes, just practical help for people who need a chance to build something stable for their families. Grace watched from the audience, proud but slightly uncomfortable with the public attention. She had agreed to attend only because Daniel had promised to keep her role in the story focused on the fund's mission rather than on personal recognition. Marcus Williams, the businessman who had created the microloan program, stood up to announce his partnership with the Fresh Start Fund. We've seen how powerful it can be when someone believes in potential rather than just looking at current circumstances, he said. Dr. Duotford, Sarah Chen followed with news about a new support network for parents in crisis. The medical community has learned important lessons from Daniel and Grace's story, she explained. We're creating better safety nets so that no parent has to choose between pride and their child's basic needs. But the most powerful moment came when Daniel invited 3 recipients of the fund's first grants to share their stories. Maria Santos had used her grant to start a home-based catering business. She now employed 2 other single mothers and was planning to open a small restaurant. James Miller had purchased equipment to start a landscaping service. His business had grown enough that he was able to move his 2 children out of transitional housing and into a stable apartment. Jennifer Walsh had started a childcare service that specifically accommodated the schedules of parents working irregular hours. Her program had become so popular that the city was considering funding expansion. Each story demonstrated the same pattern. Direct help, provided with trust and without excessive conditions, had enabled people to build sustainable solutions to their problems. What we've learned, Daniel said as the presentations concluded, is that Grace's approach to helping people isn't unusual because it's complicated. It's unusual because it's simple. He paused, looking directly at Grace. She saw a need she could meet, and she met it. She didn't worry about whether I deserved help or what I might do with it. She just helped. That simplicity was actually the most powerful part of what she gave me. Grace felt tears forming in her eyes as Daniel continued. The Fresh Start Fund operates on the same principle. We don't investigate people's backgrounds or judge their past decisions. We don't attach complicated conditions or requirements. We simply provide help to people who are working to build better lives for their families. The fund had raised $47,000 in its first 3 months of operation. Local businesses had contributed both money and in-kind services. Community members had volunteered to mentor new business owners and provide practical support. But perhaps most importantly, the fund had sparked a broader conversation about how communities could support people more effectively. Traditional charity often focuses on managing poverty rather than ending it, explained Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, a social work professor who had studied the fund's approach. What Daniel and Grace have demonstrated is that direct assistance, provided with trust and respect, can enable people to create their own solutions. After the formal program ended, Grace approached Daniel privately. "You've built something really meaningful here," she told him. "Emma would be proud when she's old enough to understand what her father accomplished." "She'll also be proud to know about the woman who saved her life," Daniel replied. "I know you don't want public recognition, but Emma will know that story. She'll understand what generosity looks like." Grace smiled, looking at Emma, who was now walking confidently around the room, charming everyone she encountered. "She's going to be an amazing young woman." "Thanks to you," Daniel said. "Thanks to both of us," Grace corrected. "You chose what to do with the help you received. That choice was just as important as my decision to offer help in the first place." The evening concluded with an announcement that the Fresh Start Fund had been selected as the pilot program for a statewide initiative supporting micro-entrepreneurship. If successful, the model would be replicated in communities across the region. Daniel felt overwhelmed by how far they had come from that desperate morning in Grace's store. Emma was healthy and thriving. His business was successful and growing. He had created something that would help other families avoid the desperation he had experienced. But the most meaningful part wasn't the business success or public recognition. It was the relationship he had built with Grace and her family. Their children played together regularly. Grace and Tom often ate at Papa's kitchen. Daniel had become part of their extended community in a way that felt natural and sustainable. "I used to think that accepting help made me weak," Daniel told Grace as they watched Emma and Michael play together. "You taught me that accepting help gracefully actually requires strength, and that using help well is a way of honoring the person who gave it." Grace nodded. "And you taught me that trust is usually rewarded when it's given freely. You could have used that check for anything, but you chose to use it to build something lasting." As families began to leave the community center, Grace reflected on how a single moment of compassion had created ripples that continued to spread throughout their community. Emma would grow up in a world where her father's determination and her community's support had combined to create opportunities for other families facing similar challenges. How do you feel knowing the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Heroine so you never miss incredible stories like this one. 3 years later, the annual Fresh Start Fund celebration had become one of the community's most anticipated events. This year, it was held in the parking lot behind Papa's kitchen, which had expanded into a full restaurant with outdoor seating and a small playground for children. Grace arrived early, carrying 4-year-old Emma on her shoulders, while Emma giggled and pointed at the colorful balloons and banners. Daniel walked beside them, pushing a stroller containing the fund's newest success story, 6-month-old twins whose mother had started a successful cleaning service with help from the program. Miss Grace," called Maria Santos, the caterer whose business now employed 8 people. "Look what I brought for the celebration." Maria's table was covered with beautiful pastries and traditional dishes from her family's recipes. Her teenage daughter worked alongside her, learning both cooking skills and business management. "Everything looks delicious," Grace said, setting Emma down so she could run toward the playground where other children were already playing. "Maria's catering is providing food for 3 weddings this month," Daniel told Grace proudly. "She's thinking about opening her own restaurant next year." The celebration showcased the diverse businesses that had emerged from the fund's support. James Miller's landscaping service had beautified several neighborhood parks. Jennifer Walsh's childcare program had enabled dozens of parents to pursue education and career advancement. But the impact extended beyond individual success stories. The neighborhood itself had been transformed. Property values had increased as small businesses attracted customers from across the city. Crime rates had dropped as more people had stable employment and community connections. Local schools reported higher graduation rates as students saw examples of entrepreneurship and determination in their own families. Dr. Patricia Rodriguez presented research findings that showed the fund's approach was more cost-effective than traditional social service programs. When you trust people to solve their own problems and provide them with the resources to do so, the results are remarkable, she explained to the gathered crowd. Direct assistance creates independence rather than dependence, she continued. Grace and Daniel's model has proven that simple generosity, combined with personal responsibility, can break cycles of poverty more effectively than complex institutional programs. Emma Rodriguez, now 4 years old and full of personality, approached the microphone with the confidence of someone who had grown up surrounded by love and community support. "I want to say thank you to Miss Grace," Emma announced, her voice clear and strong. "My daddy says she saved my life when I was a baby. Now I want to help other babies when I grow up." The crowd applauded warmly as Emma ran back to rejoin the other children at play. Grace felt overwhelmed by gratitude as she looked around at the thriving community that had grown from such a simple beginning. The Fresh Start Fund had assisted 47 families in 3 years. 23 new businesses had been created. Over 100 jobs had been generated in the local economy. But the statistics couldn't capture the most important changes. Children like Emma were growing up with examples of resilience and community support. Parents were building stable foundations for their families. Neighbors were helping neighbors with practical generosity rather than abstract charity. Daniel joined Grace at a quiet table as the celebration continued around them. "I never imagined that morning in your store would lead to all this," he said, gesturing toward the families enjoying food, music, and friendship. "I just did what felt right in the moment," Grace replied. "You're the one who built something lasting from it." "We built it together," Daniel corrected. "Your trust gave me the foundation. My work gave it structure, but everyone here helped create what it became." As the evening wound down and families began heading home, Grace reflected on the simple truth that had guided her from the beginning. When you can help someone, you should help them. Not because you'll get something back, but because helping others is what connects us all. Emma Rodriguez ran up to Grace one last time before leaving. "Miss Grace," the little girl said seriously, "when I'm big like you, I'm going to help babies too." Grace knelt down to Emma's level. "I think you're going to help lots of people, Emma, and they're going to be very lucky to know you." Watching Emma skip back to her father, Grace understood that the most important legacy of that morning 3 years ago wasn't the businesses that had been created or the money that had been raised. It was the example of generosity that would continue through Emma and all the other children who had witnessed their community choosing to support rather than judge, to trust rather than doubt, to help rather than ignore. A simple act of compassion, offered at the right moment, can change the trajectory of generations. In the distance, the lights of Papa's kitchen glowed warmly against the evening sky. Children's laughter mixed with adult conversation as families enjoyed the community that had grown from one woman's decision to feed a hungry baby and trust a desperate father to use that trust well. If you believe that kindness always creates miracles, please subscribe to Hidden Heroine. Let's spread these heartwarming stories together.